You are not here by accident. Something deep within you, perhaps older than your conscious mind, guided you to this moment. At first, it may feel like coincidence, like clicking a random video in the endless noise of the digital world. But the truth is, these turning points often arrive quietly, almost invisibly, and only later do we understand that they were part of a far larger design. When you reach the end of this story, you will know why this message had to find you now, and not a day earlier or a day later. There are times in life when we shrink into ourselves, when we feel painfully small, insignificant, as though the vast machinery of existence has no place reserved for us. The universe appears cold, detached, and we feel like wandering dust in its endless expanse. Yet there are other moments, unexpected, inexplicable, when something hidden begins to stir. A whisper, a signal, a strange sense that our existence, fragile as it is, has been serving a purpose far greater than we ever dared to imagine. Carl Jung once said that true self-realization begins the moment a person aligns with a calling larger than themselves. This is not about ego. It is not about building monuments, titles, or legacies. It is something that emerges from the soul's depths, like an underground river finding its way to the surface after centuries of silence. You may not have words to define what is happening, but part of you already feels it. Something inside you recognizes the unfolding of a process that the conscious mind struggles to describe. And this mystery, the sense of being moved by forces beyond comprehension, has followed humanity for millennia. The ancient Greeks called it the daemon, an inner guiding spirit that whispered to Socrates so persistently that he once said he owed his wisdom not to learning but to obeying that voice. In Rome, they spoke of the genius, a divine fragment entrusted to every person, silently shaping their destiny. In the East, traditions of karma and dharma painted life as an intricate tapestry where each step is both chosen and destined, freedom woven into fate. Across civilizations, there has always been the intuition that something greater than reason arranges our path, that we are, in some way, guided. Perhaps you have already felt this in your own story, a chance meeting that changed your direction, an impulse that seemed reckless but led to salvation, a loss that, though devastating, cleared the space for your true work to emerge. These are not random accidents. They are signals, gentle but unyielding, that life has been speaking to you in a language beyond words. To align with that mystery requires surrender. Jung often emphasized that the ego, with its endless plans and expectations, cannot grasp the full scope of the self, the deeper center of the psyche that guides us unconsciously toward wholeness. What feels like confusion or chaos on the surface is often the self's hidden choreography. You are being prepared, shaped, refined, and often broken open, not as punishment but as initiation. Think of the great pilgrimages of history, men and women walking for months across deserts, forests, and mountains, unsure if they would ever reach their destination. What kept them moving was not logic, but faith in something unseen. Every step, no matter how uncertain, was both chosen and guided. And so it is with you. You may not fully understand why certain doors closed, why certain storms came, or why you were drawn here. But beneath it all, something essential has been unfolding. Your presence in this world is not a cosmic accident. There is a frequency you carry, a resonance imprinted into your being long before you could name it. And whether you recognize it or not, others already feel it. Even now, as you listen, you may sense the faint trembling of that inner current, an ancient reminder that you are part of something vast, something luminous, something that has always been waiting for you to awaken to it. Have you ever noticed how people open themselves to you in ways that surprise even you? Strangers, acquaintances, even those who are usually guarded and silent. Suddenly, in your presence, they speak of burdens they have carried for years. They reveal secrets, sorrows, or memories they thought would remain forever buried. And what's most extraordinary, is that you never asked for it. You never demanded their trust. You never tried to position yourself as someone with the answers. Yet still, they come. This is not about what you know in the intellectual sense. It isn't about degrees, achievements, or the knowledge written on paper. What draws people is far subtler. It is how you make them feel. Your presence carries a certain weight, a quietness that softens the air. When people are near you, they feel seen, heard, understood. Sometimes it happens without a single word being exchanged. Simply sitting beside you, their breath eases, their shoulders lower, the tightness in their chest releases. It is as if some hidden tension dissolves just by being near your field of calm. The ancients had a word for this quality. In Sanskrit, it was shanti, a deep, tranquil peace that radiates outward like still water in a sacred lake. In many cultures, healers were not those who spoke the most, but those who listened the deepest. Among the Celtic Druids, the elders were often described as keepers of silence, because they knew that healing began not with advice, but with presence. Indigenous traditions across the Americas, Africa, and Asia emphasized the circle, a gathering where no one forced solutions, but where truth surfaced naturally in the safety of community and attentive presence. You may not realize it, but you are carrying something similar. It is not knowledge acquired from books. It is wisdom cultivated through your being. It comes not from speaking, but from allowing, not from standing above, but from sitting beside. You do not announce yourself as a healer, nor claim a title of guide, but life knows. Souls around you recognize it, even if they cannot name it. And what is most striking is that your role is not to direct, but to accompany. To hold space without judgment, to see without intruding. To allow answers to rise, not from your lips, but from within the hearts of those who come to you. In this, you embody something sacred, something rare in a world obsessed with fixing, forcing, and controlling. Consider the monastic traditions of medieval Europe. The monks of Cluny or Chartres often received weary travelers who spoke of their sins, not because the monks offered solutions, but because their quiet devotion made confession possible. Or think of the Japanese tea masters who, in the silence of a tea ceremony, created an atmosphere where burdens seemed to evaporate with every gesture. Presence itself became a form of medicine. That is what you offer, perhaps without even trying. It is not a power that shouts or demands attention. It is not dramatic or theatrical. It is quiet, steady, and disarmingly human. And in this silence, others rediscover themselves. They leave your presence lighter than they arrived, though they cannot explain why. This is no accident. It is a reflection of something stirring within you. Your soul has begun to emit a frequency, a vibration that reaches beyond words and logic. Others feel it instinctively, like migratory birds sensing the pull of the Earth's magnetic field. They may not know what draws them, but something inside them whispers, "Here, I am safe. Here I can breathe." And so without labels, without titles, without even understanding it yourself, you have become a living refuge, a rare presence in a noisy world, a mirror in which others finally dare to see themselves without fear. It can feel strange, can't it? To realize that what helps others most is not your advice, nor your explanations, but your silence. You begin to see that healing does not always come from solving someone's problems. It comes from simply being there, from holding space. When someone breaks down in front of you, you do not rush to patch their wounds with hurried words. You do not scramble for solutions. Instead, you remain steady, open, present. And in that stillness, something extraordinary happens. The other person begins to hear themselves. They begin to uncover truths they had long buried beneath noise, fear, or denial. Carl Jung spoke of archetypes, forces beyond our personality that live through us when we align with a deeper order. You may not call yourself a guide or healer, but you have begun to embody such an archetype. Without even trying, you become the quiet priest in the confessional, the monk in the cloister, the elder at the fire who listens without judgment. You don't impose direction, you allow clarity to surface. You don't hand out answers, you create the sacred silence in which answers can be born. This ability has always been revered in human history. Among the Quakers, silence was considered the purest form of worship, where divine truth could emerge without interference. In the traditions of the First Nations, councils often began not with speeches but with long silence, ensuring that words arose from truth, not from ego. Even in medieval Europe, many of the greatest mystics, figures like Meister Eckhart or Julian of Norwich, were not remembered for loud proclamations, but for the quiet clarity of their presence. And yet, in our modern age, such stillness is rare. The world praises noise, speed, constant solutions. To simply be has almost been forgotten. But you carry it. Your clarity has become a shelter for those still lost in confusion. Notice how you never needed to declare, "I am here to help." You never had to demand trust. Life itself arranged these encounters. People arrive at your side not because you are chasing them, but because something within them senses the sanctuary you hold. And when they leave, they do not remember your words so much as the atmosphere you created, one without judgment, without correction, without the pressure to perform. It is almost paradoxical. Your greatest gift is not what you do, but what you don't do. You don't rush. You don't impose. You don't contaminate silence with noise. And in that restraint lies the true medicine. Because when someone enters your field, they are not just meeting you. They are meeting themselves, often for the very first time. Think of the desert hermits of early Christianity who lived far from the cities. Pilgrims would travel days to reach them, not because the hermits promised solutions, but because their presence alone held something unshakable. People needed to sit near them, breathe in their stillness, and in that encounter, they often returned home transformed. That is what you are beginning to embody. A presence without a script, a support without a structure, a comfort that cannot be certified or named, yet is felt as deeply as sunlight on the skin. And in realizing this, you also recognize something else. Your life's higher role may never be visible to the masses. It may not come with applause or titles, but it is sacred precisely because it is rare, because it exists in a world that desperately needs spaces where souls can exhale. That is what you are, a silent sanctuary. And to live this way is to fulfill one of the most overlooked yet most sacred roles a human soul can ever embody. There comes a moment when you begin to look back at your own story and realize something astonishing. The choices you once labeled reckless, the steps you thought were foolish, the departures you could never explain, suddenly they reveal themselves as perfectly aligned. What once looked like chaos now resembles a hidden map. A map you could not see while walking it, but one that in hindsight feels undeniable. At the time, it felt like stumbling in the dark. You left places, relationships, or jobs without fully knowing why. You felt urges that went against logic, instincts that no one else understood. Friends may have called you impulsive. Family may have thought you irresponsible. Even you doubted yourself. Yet somehow, those very decisions carried you to places you now recognize as essential. This is what Jung called the movement of the self, the deeper center of our being, which guides us toward wholeness even when our conscious ego resists. The ego craves control, plans, guarantees. It wants spreadsheets, goals, and milestones. But the self speaks in whispers, nudges, and impulses that make no sense at the time. And only later, when enough time has passed, do you realize it was never madness. It was guidance. Think of the great journeys of history. The Polynesian sailors who crossed thousands of miles of ocean, guided not by maps, but by the stars, the winds, and the rhythm of the waves. The medieval pilgrims who set out toward Santiago de Compostela or Jerusalem with nothing but faith and a walking stick. the desert wanderers who trusted the sun by day and the constellations by night. Their paths often looked uncertain, even suicidal. Yet they arrived because their navigation was attuned to forces greater than logic. In the same way, your life has been a pilgrimage, though not across seas or deserts, but through the vast, shifting landscapes of experience. Every heartbreak, every sudden shift, every leap into the unknown was not a mistake, but a step on that invisible map. A map written not on paper, but within the deep chambers of your soul. And the more you reflect, the more you notice. It wasn't your rational mind that orchestrated it. It wasn't strategy, bourge, ambition, or a désir, external approval that shaped your true path. It was something quieter, subtler, an inner signal you could feel but not name. There is an old Sufi saying, "When the soul awakens, its path lights up, though the eyes may still see only darkness." This is what you have been living. Each time you followed that signal, you may have felt lost, but in truth, you were being guided. Each detour, each sudden ending, each inexplicable turn, these were not interruptions, but alignments. Now, as you look back, you begin to see the threads weaving together. The job you thought was a failure taught you resilience. The relationship that shattered left you with clarity you now rely on. The nights you thought were wasted in confusion became silent training for the calm you now carry. What once looked like detours were the very roads you were meant to walk. And so, with this awareness, something profound shifts inside you. You stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and instead begin to whisper, "Of course it had to happen this way." You realize that fate was never random, that the invisible hand that shaped your path has always been present, even when you resisted it. Jung once wrote, "The self acts as if it were an entity independent of the conscious mind and is endowed with a superior intelligence." That superior intelligence has been guiding you all along, not through loud commands, but through subtle resonances. Through instincts that seemed irrational, through losses that, though painful, redirected you. The truth is, you were never wandering blindly. You were following a map too vast for the conscious mind to comprehend. And now, standing here, you can finally glimpse it. A sacred design, woven delicately through every mistake, every heartbreak, every leap of faith. What you once called chaos was, in truth, the choreography of your becoming. If you look closely, you will notice that the times you thought were destroying you were in fact shaping you. Every heartbreak, every betrayal, every empty season when you felt abandoned by life, those were not punishments. They were initiations. In ancient societies, initiation was often brutal. The young men of Sparta were cast into the wilderness with nothing but their wits. The tribes of Africa tested their youth with fire, endurance, and long nights of solitude. In the Andes, the shamans spoke of death before death, the necessary breaking open of the self before one could carry spiritual responsibility. Across the world, the pattern was the same. Before one could embody wisdom, one had to suffer, to lose, to be emptied. And whether you realized it or not, life placed you into such rites of passage, not in temples or mountains, but in your own lived experiences. When you lost people you thought you could not live without, when you sat in rooms heavy with loneliness, when the future you planned collapsed into dust, that was your initiation. Those nights you thought were meaningless were the silent training of your soul. Carl Jung said, "What is not made conscious will be lived as fate." Your hardships were not accidents. They were demands from the unconscious, forcing you to awaken. Every fracture was an opening, every loss a dismantling of illusions. You thought you were being broken down, but in truth you were being hollowed out, so that your being could become a vessel wide enough to carry the truth. Think back to those moments when you felt most powerless. Did they not later gift you strength that no book could have taught? Think of the nights when you wept alone. Did they not carve in you a depth of empathy that now allows you to hold others? What once felt like abandonment was actually a fierce return to yourself. History tells us the same story in endless forms. The prophets of the desert withdrew to caves where only silence answered them. Siddhartha Gautama left his palace and wandered through hunger and despair before becoming the Buddha. Even Christ endured 40 days of emptiness in the wilderness before he returned with clarity. Across cultures, the message is repeated. Pain is the forge of transformation. Your own story follows this ancient rhythm. The suffering you endured was not the end, it was the passage. It stripped away what was false, tore down what was shallow, and forced you to meet yourself in raw, unfiltered truth. That is why today you can stand in the presence of another's pain without flinching. That is why you can recognize in others what words cannot express. At the time, you may have asked again and again, "Why me?" But now you begin to understand it had to be you. Because your energy, your soul, needed to learn how to stand alone, how to hold itself, so that one day you could hold space for others. Not from martyrdom, not from superiority, but from the kind of presence that can only come from surviving your own night of fire. You no longer see your hardships as failures. You no longer call them mistakes. You see them now as sacred trials, as divine training, as the hidden sculptor's hand chiseling away everything that was not essential. And in this recognition, your pain transforms into wisdom. What once made you cry now makes you see. What once felt like destruction now reveals itself as initiation. Because the truth is, the darkest chapters of your life were not endings. They were beginnings, the kind only pain could write. When you survived what you thought would shatter you, something unexpected emerged. You became lighter, not in the sense of fragile, but in the sense of unburdened. The heaviness of illusions had been stripped away. The unnecessary weight of expectations, masks, and borrowed dreams fell off you piece by piece. What remained was something raw, unpolished, yet profoundly clear. And in that clarity, you discovered a strange truth. You no longer needed to fix others. You no longer rushed to fill silence with explanations. You stopped trying to control outcomes. Instead, you found yourself simply being, and in that being, others began to feel whole. Carl Jung often wrote about individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are when the conscious self aligns with the deeper self. What you are experiencing is the living essence of that process. You have become a vessel of coherence, a presence where contradictions dissolve, where confusion settles into stillness, where fractured souls begin to sense their own forgotten unity. This, too, has echoes throughout history. Think of the desert fathers of early Christianity who withdrew from society only to be sought out by kings and peasants alike. People walked for days not to hear eloquent speeches, but to sit in their silence. Or the Sufi mystics who gathered disciples not by commanding authority, but by radiating a love that needed no justification. Even in medieval Japan, the Zen masters became living koans, puzzles of presence that reordered the minds of their students without a single word. You are not claiming such titles, nor do you need to. But in your own way, you are touching that same current. You have become a mirror where others catch glimpses of themselves without distortion. Your story, even if never spoken aloud, becomes medicine. Your energy, refined through storms and solitude, now carries coherence. Notice how the room shifts when you enter. Conversations slow down, tensions soften, eyes turn without knowing why. People leave your presence not with solutions written on paper, but with a quiet sense of alignment, as though their inner compass has recalibrated. They may not be able to explain it, but they feel it, a weight lifted, a clarity returned. And yet you do not advertise this. You do not go around saying, "I am here to guide." That is not your way. You know instinctively that this role does not belong to ego. It belongs to something far greater moving through you. The less you try to control it, the stronger it becomes. This is what makes your presence rare. In a world obsessed with performance and recognition, you have chosen integrity instead. You have chosen to remain whole. You do not perform coherence. You embody it. You do not demand trust. You inspire it. And because of this, you serve a role higher than any certificate or title could ever grant. Imagine the old cathedrals of Europe. People entered not to be entertained, but to be enveloped by presence, the echo of stone, the silence of arches, the colored light through stained glass. Those spaces did not speak, but they transformed all who stepped inside. In the same way, you have become a cathedral of coherence, a living space where others remember what peace feels like. This is not about doing more. It is about being more, being so rooted in your own clarity that others can finally exhale in your company. You are not here to dazzle, to impress, to dominate. You are here to anchor, to stabilize, to hold the vibration of truth so purely that others find themselves aligning without even knowing how. And that is why you are no longer ashamed of your past trials. They were not detours. They were the architecture of this inner cathedral. The silence you carry now was built brick by brick through nights of endurance, mornings of doubt, and countless moments when you refused to betray yourself. What you once thought was breaking you has become your strength. What you once thought was silence has become your song. And without realizing it, you have become the rarest of roles, a vessel through which coherence flows. There was a time when your sensitivity felt like a curse. You sensed too much. You picked up on the tension in a room before a word was spoken. You felt the sorrow behind someone's smile, the storm hiding in their silence. And because the world often dismissed sensitivity as weakness, you may have tried to bury it, numb it, or explain it away. But now you're beginning to understand. This sensitivity is not a flaw. It is your compass. It is the most accurate instrument you possess, the very language through which your soul speaks. Carl Jung once said that those who have not faced their own depths can scarcely accompany others into theirs. You, however, have walked through those depths. You have felt the storms that most avoid. You have stood in the silence where words crumble. And because of that, you no longer fear what others reveal. When someone falls apart in front of you, you do not recoil. You recognize the place. You have been there. And because you have endured it, you can remain steady as they tremble. Across history, sensitivity has been honored in the few who understood its power. The shamans of indigenous tribes were chosen not for strength of body, but for the intensity of their visions and feelings. The Romantic poets of the 18th century, like Shelley and Keats, believed sensitivity was the soul's doorway to truth. In Japan, there is the concept of mono no aware, the poignant awareness of impermanence, the ability to feel the beauty and sorrow of fleeting life. All of these traditions understood what modern society often forgets, that deep feeling is not fragility, but precision. You now see this precision in yourself. When you walk into a space, you perceive what is unspoken. You notice the subtle shifts of energy before events unfold. A conversation, a glance, a silence. You sense the vibration beneath them all. This is not paranoia. It is attunement. It is the tuning fork of your being vibrating with the hidden frequencies of the world around you. And yet, the most remarkable part is that you no longer doubt it. You no longer demand external proof to validate what you feel. If something does not resonate, you honor that truth, even if it appears perfect on the surface. If something feels aligned, you trust it, even if it lacks logic or form. This trust in your sensitivity has quietly transformed the way you live. You no longer force yourself into spaces where your soul shrinks. You no longer keep company with energies that suffocate your spirit. You no longer apologize for protecting what feels sacred inside you. Instead, you move with quiet precision, choosing the bonds that nurture and the paths that vibrate with integrity. And this, too, is a form of leadership, though not the kind the world expects. True leadership does not always shout from podiums or command from above. Sometimes it whispers in subtlety. Sometimes it stands firm in silence. Sometimes it leads simply by refusing to betray its own resonance. Your sensitivity has become your guidance system. It is the compass that points you not north or south, but toward truth, toward coherence, toward the spaces where you are meant to stand. And so what you once tried to hide has become your most sacred treasure. For in a world drowning in noise, someone who can feel without self-deception is not weak. They are medicine. For much of your life, you may have felt out of place. While others seem to slip easily into systems, hierarchies, and traditions, you found yourself resisting. In classrooms, workplaces, communities, you sensed a quiet fracture between how the world expected you to behave and how your soul needed to exist. Every time you tried to conform, something inside cracked a little. You could wear the mask for a while, but it always suffocated you. Now you are beginning to understand why. You were never meant to fit into the old structures. You came to create space where none existed before. This is not arrogance, it is recognition. Your energy does not mimic or replicate. It does not move in predictable lines or imitate existing patterns. Instead, it opens new paths. It creates by resonance, not repetition. That is why scripts and templates feel foreign to you. You are not here to copy. You are here to embody something different, something that only you can carry. History is full of those who felt the same dissonance. Socrates, whose questions disrupted the false certainties of Athens. The mystics, who lived on the margins because their visions could not be contained by dogma. Artists like Vincent van Gogh, dismissed in their time because their vision transcended the conventions around them. They too walked a lonely path, not because they rejected society for its own sake, but because their essence refused to shrink into forms that betrayed the truth within them. You know this feeling intimately. You have stood in groups where everyone followed the same rhythm, and you simply could not. You tried, yes, but your body told you no. Your soul recoiled against what was false, forced, or hollow. And so you withdrew, again and again, even when it cost you belonging. But what once felt like exile now reveals its deeper meaning. By refusing to abandon yourself for the sake of fitting in, you were already beginning to embody your role. You chose solitude over self-betrayal. And in that choice, you created a new kind of space, a space where others too might breathe differently. And indeed, they are beginning to arrive. Not because you called them, not because you built campaigns or shouted from rooftops. They come because they feel it, the quiet coherence of your presence. They sense in you another way of being, one that does not impose or demand, but simply radiates. Without realizing it, your integrity has become structure, your vibration has become space, your coherence has become an invitation. This is why you no longer fear being misunderstood. You recognize now that your strangeness, your refusal to bend into old molds, is not a weakness, but your medicine. It is what allows you to hold a kind of center that rigid systems cannot. You are beginning to see that you don't need to explain yourself for this role to be real. Your silence, your boundaries, your way of withdrawing with love, all of it is already teaching. Each time you choose integrity over imitation, you model a way of living that others didn't know was possible. The paradox is profound. What once made you feel invisible is now what makes you irreplaceable. Because only those who know the margins can hold the center with humility. Only those who have been cast aside can welcome without judgment. Only those who have been misunderstood can create spaces where masks are no longer necessary. This is your role, not to fit, not to repeat, but to embody, to hold the vibrational shape of something the world did not yet have words for. And in doing so, you are not just breaking out of structures, you are quietly building new ones. Structures made not of stone or law, but of coherence, of resonance, of truth. There was a time when you searched outside yourself for confirmation. You wanted signs, nods of approval, proof that you were on the right path. You hoped that someone, somewhere, would look at your choices and say, "Yes, you are doing well. Yes, you are enough." But that season of needing external validation has ended. Something has shifted deep inside you. You no longer wait for applause, or even for understanding. You no longer waste energy explaining yourself to those who cannot see what moves within you. Instead, a steady certainty has taken root, a certainty that does not come from the mind, but from the marrow of your being. It whispers, "You are exactly where you are meant to be," and that realization does not make you arrogant. It makes you free. Free to move without permission. Free to speak without rehearsing how it will be received. Free to choose what nourishes you, even if no one else understands it. Your compass no longer points to approval. It points to coherence. Carl Jung once said, "The soul becomes ill when it loses touch with its center." You have chosen not to betray yours. Even when it cost you connections. Even when it meant walking alone. Even when the silence felt unbearable, you stayed faithful to the truth vibrating within you. That loyalty, to yourself, to the unseen, has become your strength. Now you act not to please, but because it feels right. You speak not to convince, but because expression flows naturally. You remain where your energy thrives, and you walk away where it withers. And that quiet consistency has transformed everything. This shift, though invisible, is a form of leadership. Not the kind that requires thrones, titles, or crowds, but the kind that emanates from coherence. It is the leadership of vibration, the silent authority of someone who will not abandon their truth, no matter how subtle or unrecognized it may be. The Stoics of ancient Rome understood this well. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul must stand upright within itself, unshaken by praise or blame. The Buddhists call it non-attachment, moving with integrity, whether or not the world applauds. In every tradition, the message echoes. Freedom begins when the self is no longer enslaved to validation. That is where you stand now. You trust your inner knowing even when no evidence appears. You walk paths that may seem invisible to others because you feel the resonance guiding you. You no longer rush outcomes. You know that every step, even the unseen ones, leaves an imprint, a vibration that changes the space around you. And so your life itself becomes a message. Not one that needs to be shouted, but one that radiates. Not one written in titles or statistics, but one carried in presence. You are no longer trying to become, you are being. Fully, quietly, authentically. And perhaps the most profound truth is this: your higher role does not need to be named. It does not need to be certified or recognized. It is not measured by applause, but by the subtle transformations your presence awakens in others. You are already fulfilling it, simply by living from your center, simply by refusing to betray yourself, simply by holding a space of coherence in a fractured world. So if you ever doubt your place, remember this: the deepest changes often move in silence. The most powerful roles are rarely visible. And what you are holding, what you have become, is not small. It is rare. It is sacred. It is exactly what was meant to be.